Good afternoon and welcome to Memphis Like Gas and Water's Women and Energy Empowerment Series. I am your host, Gail Jones Carson, the Vice President of Community and External Affairs at Memphis Like Gas and Water. Thank you for joining us for the 8th Women and Energy Empowerment Series for 2022. The Women in Energy Empowerment Series launched in 2019 as an in-person luncheon for MLGW Women in Management. The series is now virtual and features a woman leader in the utility and energy industry who speaks on her tools for success and professional obstacles. The goal of the series remains the same, and that is to empower, uplift, and inspire. Our special guest today is Shannon Pierce. Thank you, Shannon, for being with us. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. Shannon is the Vice President of Growth, and she's Vice President, Growth and Chief External Affairs Officer at SouthStar Energy Services. She is a member of the Southern Company Gas family of companies. SouthStar currently operates in 10 states and offers competitively priced and reliable natural gas products and services to satisfy customer needs. Shannon is responsible for creating new value-driven relationships that drive new lines of revenue by focusing on customer needs and new markets for sustained growth. She has operations responsibility for the B2B customer segment and leads SouthStar's efforts in maintaining and building strategic relationships with regulatory and government agencies and industry associations. Shannon also directs the strategy for expanding the organization's overall profile in the communities in which it operates. Since joining Southern Company Gas in 2004, as regulatory counsel for the company's legal activities with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Shannon has held leadership roles with increasing responsibilities in legal, external affairs, and utility operations. She also has leadership roles in the following Southern Company Gas strategic corporate initiatives, and that will be the lead counsel, which focuses on culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Executive sponsor for an employee resource group, work development and planning steering committee, COVID-19 responsible reentry work, reimagine leadership team, and executive sponsor of Evergreen, an employee group with the purpose of enhancing the company's engagement with external partners to promote the sustainability through volunteer efforts. Oh, Shannon, you got a lot of responsibility. I'm gonna ask you in a minute how many employees you got working for you.
Not many.
well, you need a raise. Okay. So Shannon received both her undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Virginia, and she's a native of Shuri, Virginia, and currently resides in Atlanta. Welcome, Shannon. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate you having me. Well, as Gail read, I do wear a lot of hats, and while my team is small, we are mighty, and I am fortunate each day to get to work with a group of just wonderful people and professionals within my business unit, but also across the Southern Company footprint. And we rely on our resources across Southern Company to support efforts that we do. So I'm very, very fortunate to be a part of such a wonderful company that is Southern Company. So I will share a little bit about my career path, and I will start by saying that I have benefited from many villages of people in my personal life and in my career that have allowed me to have the opportunities that I would have never imagined. I hold true to the proverb around it takes a village to raise a child. And I actually think that follows me even into adulthood. It still takes a village to raise me. And I'm grateful for the various villages that I have. And I'll talk a little bit about that throughout our time today. But I'll start with, where I grew up. And Gail mentioned that I grew up in Surrey, Virginia. If you're not familiar with Surrey, many people aren't. Surrey is a very rural community in Southeast Virginia. It's actually across the James River from Jamestown settlement, where this nation got its start and where the first enslaved Africans were brought to this country. And my little community of then about 6,000, now we're about 7,000, again, was a very close-knit community and really lifted me up throughout my childhood and gave me a sense of support that has cemented the foundation for me going forward. We are not just a small community and rural community, but we don't have a lot of infrastructure even today. My parents just got broadband in April of 2022. And so I would go home often and be off the grid in a sense, which could be nice at times. I will admit that, but that just gives you a sense of just how rural our community is. But as rural as we were, I got a very strong education, in part because of this industry that we all have the privilege to work and lead in. Dominion Energy has a nuclear power facility in Surrey County, and the tax base from that facility really allowed my small little community to give our tiny little school system great tools for education. And core to that were the tremendous teachers and support staff, my mother being among them, that really poured into us and supported us. And that's an example of the villages that really have helped me navigate even today. And so I've had an appreciation for what our industry can do to support communities. And I may not have understood it at the time when I was walking the halls of Surrey Elementary School and Surrey High School. But as I got older, I really realized that if it were not for the energy industry and its commitment to our community, the education I received may not have been as great, and it may not have given me the kind of foundation that I was able to take with me when I went to college and beyond. So that's where I grew up. And to give you, a little bit more of a sense of where I grew up. So I'm a lawyer by training, and I came to that decision of wanting to be a lawyer in the 4th grade. And it was because in our little community, you didn't need a lot of lawyers. There are only 6,000 people. And the two lawyers, wow. The two lawyers in our community were my godparents, husband and wife. And, one was a prosecutor and did part-time county attorney advising the local governing body. The other, and then they were in private practice together. And in the 4th grade, a teacher just asked, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I spent a lot of time with my godparents and looked at the kind of influence that they had in our communities. I looked, frankly, how they lived compared to what the salaries of my mother as an elementary school teacher and my father, who was a mechanic. And I would go to their office and see clients coming in and seeking their counsel. And for some reason, that really resonated with me. And so in the 4th grade, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. Didn't really know what that meant. other than what I could see. But that exposure to my godparents at that early age really planted some seeds that blossomed into me choosing law as a path. And I mentioned exposure very intentionally because I want to talk a little bit more about exposure and how that plays into not just my career, but I think all of our careers in a way that we may not always appreciate. And so when I talk about my career journey, as Gail read, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of things in my very short career. I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years. And while that sounds like a lot of time for me, when I think about my colleagues who are still with the company, who've been in the industry for 35 and 40 years, I still want to pretend like I'm a baby in the industry, although I know that's not quite true. And when I think about what has served me well in my community, I think about, again, the villages of support that have helped me navigate, but I also think about how those villages of support were developed in my career. And I got some advice very early on that really resonated with me because when I transitioned from the law firm, so I was in private practice for about 3 years outside of law school. And that's how I discovered the opportunities in industry. And I'll pause right there, actually. When I got the assignment from the law firm that I ended up working for, they told me who the partner was I'll be working for. And I looked him up and it said energy and utilities. And I emailed HR back and said, I think you've made a mistake because I don't know what energy and utilities practice is. I know who the gas company is. I know who the electric company is, but the practice of energy and utilities law, not sure what that is. And frankly, I thought I needed some type of technical background. And I was an English major for a very good reason in undergrad. And so I did not think that the energy and utilities practice of law was for me. Well, the HR director informed me that it was not a mistake and that they thought I would be a good fit for the practice and that I would really enjoy it. And at the time, I didn't have any other offers. So I trusted her and I joined the energy and utilities team. And so I did that for about 3 years. And then I transitioned to what was then called AGO Resources. Now we are called Southern Company Gas after being acquired by Southern Company in 2016. And when I got to AGO Resources, I was enjoying representing the company at the FERC, and I would go to DC quite a bit, do my job, because my parents said, you get that good job, you put your head down and just do the work. And so that's what I was doing. I was going to DC, representing the company, coming back to Atlanta, going into my office, putting my head down and doing the work. But I noticed around me, there were others who seemed to be navigating a little bit better than I was and felt a little bit more secure and confident about their place within the organization than I did. And I couldn't figure out why. And a good friend of mine who had joined the company a couple of years before I did, she said, Shannon, you need to get out of your office. You need to get out of your office and meet people and learn from them and build relationships. And that piece of advice really changed everything for me. Because even though I knew in my personal life, I had villages of support, I didn't really translate that into the working world. Again, my mom is an educator, my dad's a mechanic. They weren't in corporate America. My parents were lawyers, but they're little country lawyers. They, I didn't have anyone to tell me how to navigate this big Fortune 500 corporation that I now found myself in. And her advice was so simple, but yet it was so profound. And really at the core of it was, I needed to extend myself outside of the four corners of my job responsibility to build relationships and to network and to learn from others and get mentorship from others. And again, that advice, so simple, but yet profound, and really changed everything for me. And at the time, I didn't have a framework around which to call it, other than my friend said, do this. And then later in my career, I just learned about a model called the PI model. And that model, if you're not familiar with it, I'd like to share a video with you to tee up that model. And then I'd like to share with you how that model has helped me navigate in my career. So if we could play that video. Thank you. So the PI model, performance, image, and exposure. And the PI model has been around for about 25 years. But again, I only came to know it as a framework maybe about 10 years ago. And although I did not know the framework in particular, when I reflect on my career, I realized that my career was, or has been, and continues to be, about how I manage my pie and how that pie is cut. And again, PI stands for performance, image, and exposure. And more specifically, the PI talks about when leaders are looking at promoting and providing opportunity for career progression. The further along you are in your career, that performance piece accounts for about 10% of what leaders are thinking about. And I'm just going to let that sit for a minute. Performance at 10%. Now, mind you, my parents and my godparents and my grandparents taught me, again, you get that good job, you go and you do the work and you perform well and you excel. And that's your ticket. And they weren't wrong, but that's not all that it takes. And so the PI model says, again, what leaders are thinking about when they're making decisions about you and your career and about me and my career. The performance piece is only factoring in about 10% of their mind. Now, it's not saying that we can get away with performing at a 10% level. Not saying that at all. We still need to continue to excel and do well and perform and meet and exceed expectations, because frankly, that's what we get paid to do. We get paid to perform. But career progression is not a given. It's not guaranteed. It takes more to continue to thrive in the environment in which we find ourselves in. The next piece, image, how people think about you, how you show up, your personal brand. You hear a lot of people talk about your personal brand. What people say about you. What are you known for? Are you known to be a problem solver? Are you known for being responsive? Are you known for volunteering for projects that are maybe outside of your day-to-day? Are you participating in company committees? Are you known as a go-getter or change agent? That's your image. And the model says that when senior leaders are thinking about career progression and promotion, that image piece accounts for about 30% of what they're thinking about. But again, that still is not enough. Even if you perform extremely well, you have a great reputation, great personal brand, your image is very solid. If you don't have exposure, those things are not going to matter as much. They're not going to get you to the next level. And so that exposure piece, who knows you? What do they say about you when you're not in the room or when your name is called? What do people say about you? What are you known for again? And who are the decision makers around your career? That exposure piece accounts for about 60% according to this pie model. Now, is the model perfect? I will not say it is. Is it absolute? I will say no. But I will say my experience has taught me that I need to manage each of those things, the performance, image, and exposure, in order for me to continue to grow in my career and in my leadership. And when I think about, again, some of the obstacles I have faced and how pie has played a part in how I've navigated, I will tell you that, again, I was in the legal department for 8 years. And the first few years before I got that advice from my good friend to tell me to get out of my office, as I shared earlier, I struggled to figure out, how I fit in the organization, if I was truly valued, if I was truly adding value. And I just did not have a real good sense of where I stood and how my career was going to go. And once you told me, to get out of my office, I started to, reach out.
That was a friend who told you that?
Yes, a friend of mine. Yes.
A friend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a friend, she started at the company. She's also a lawyer and started with AGL a couple of years before I did. And she's certainly a part of my village and one of my safe places. And so I one day just went into her office and unloaded and let her know that I was just struggling. And she just said, Shannon, you need to get out of your office. She said, I know you're doing a great job. I know your clients like you, but people don't know you on a broader basis. My little client group, that little silo, they knew me and they knew I performed well for them. But outside of that, I was not known. And she thought that if I got out of my comfort zone and got out of my office and would connect with people, I would, one, learn our business in a more impactful way, because I would be broadening the folks that I'm getting exposure to. They could see what I can do and what I bring to the table. And by doing that, I was able to get assigned to a project and work with a leader who I didn't work with often. And we had a major issue down in Florida that was very controversial and presented a lot of exposure to our company. And I got assigned to the project, and in that project, I got to work with a leader. And did I perform well? Yes, but that's what I was taught to do. That's what I get paid to do. Did they know me as someone who was responsive and a problem solver? Yes. But it was that exposure to that leader that allowed me to build a relationship with him, such that when he got a promotion, when it was time to fill the role that he was leaving, he thought of me And I know for a fact that had we not built a relationship and I had not gotten exposure to him, I would not have gotten that opportunity. And that opportunity was for me to leave the legal department and transition from a regulatory lawyer to a regulatory strategist and lead a team of people for the very first time in my career. Because I didn't go to law school to lead people. That's not typically what we set out to do. But because I had that exposure to him, he said, "You're the person I want for this role." And what's even more significant is that from an exposure standpoint, had I not built relationships outside of him, I don't know if I would have gotten the role, because just having him saying, "I know what she can do," was not going to be enough, because as you all know, as regulated entities, the regulatory affairs team has a huge responsibility. And this was an opportunity for me to really show what I was made of and what I could really do and how I could continue to grow in the company. And I had to have others who also supported this idea, because to that point, no one from the legal department really had left the legal department to work outside of the department. And so in some people's mind, maybe they were taking a chance on me. And the reason why I believe that these senior leaders were willing to take a chance on me is because of the relationships I had built over the last 5 or 6 years and getting exposure to them, so that when they were having conversations when I wasn't in the room about who we're going to get to fill this role and what can she do, they could speak to that and had personal knowledge around that. And I really do believe that because of that exposure, that's 60%, that made a difference in my career trajectory. Because again, I never thought about leaving the practice of law. I went to, I started off in the 4th grade wanting to be a lawyer. That was the only plan I ever had. I did not know that I would find tremendous satisfaction outside of a legal role. And this opportunity allowed me to see that there was more that I could do in this industry outside of the law. And it's because I had folks, again, who were willing to sponsor me because of the exposure I had to them. I even had one gentleman who said to me, "Well, we know you did a great job in the legal department, but we never thought that you wanted to be something other than a lawyer." So they had this image of me as someone who wanted to be a lawyer and that's all I wanted to do. But it was because of the additional exposure that others had to me, they could let him know, "Oh no, she's willing to do something else." And so that's how the PA model really started to play out for me. And it continues to do so, because after being in regulatory for a number of years, I started having conversations with leaders that, again, I had not had as much time with, who were in the operations side of the business. And they said, "We think you should get some operations experience to broaden your career and build your business acumen and really learn the core of what we do." And again, I'm a lawyer. I'm not an engineer. I didn't grow up in operations. And it was the first time that a lawyer had transitioned into our distribution operations team. But again, it was because of the relationships I built and the exposure I got to others who could speak for me, that allowed the company to be comfortable with giving me the opportunity to expand and to grow and to learn, and also to leverage the skills that I had built in legal and regulatory, and they developed an appreciation that those skills could translate into leading our frontline employees. And so I went from being an individual contributor lawyer with no desire to do anything but be a lawyer to now going to Illinois to work in operations and leading a team of about 256 people who went out every day to serve our customers and operate and help maintain our system. And talking about me getting out of my comfort zone, that was the epitome of getting me out of my comfort zone. But what got me to the point of saying, yes, I will do this, and yes, I can do this, is because, again, in my previous role in regulatory affairs, I developed really good relationships with the VPs of operations for the states in which I have responsibility for. And so even if I didn't have a specific issue that I needed to talk with them about, sometimes I would just sit there and listen to them and the issues that they manage. And I would learn from them and just kind of soak it all in. And they too knew that I was immersing myself in learning from them. And so when people ask them, what do you think about Shannon? How do you think she will do in operations? You know, she's a lawyer, she's in regulatory, but can she make this leap to operations? And because of the engagement and the exposure and the relationships I had with them, they too could speak to how my skill set could translate into the operations area. And for me, that experience was not just about what I could bring to the operations, but also what I could learn to continue to expand me in my leadership. And so I would often say that I was learning while I was leading. And I'm a much better leader having spent those 2 years in operations. And so I really do believe that without, again, that exposure, I would not have been able to make these incremental leaps in my career. In some of the prep materials, I was asked to share, what are some things that I wish I knew before starting in my career? And I will say that hands down, I wish I knew about the pie model when I started college, because I would have been able to navigate that. But I also would say that I wish I had an earlier appreciation around being okay with being uncomfortable. Because again, when I think about guidance I had been given early on in terms of being a strong performer, putting your head down and do a great job, I would not give myself any grace to make mistakes. And when I didn't do that, then I also wouldn't take a chance to take on new responsibilities that may not been in the core of what my educational and early work experience had led me to. But getting to a place of being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being comfortable with asking questions. Because at the end of the day, as leaders, we should be asking questions. And I had to really, really understand that that's what I should be doing. And I should not sit back and always try to figure it out on my own. And that I should use my resources, and it is okay to do that. I wish someone had told me that earlier in my career. that it was.
Okay, so Shannon, I gotta stop you right there.
Uh-huh.
So I tell you, when you talk about asking questions,
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, young folks and females especially, that when you're at the table, that you need to speak, because if you don't, sometimes people think you don't have anything in your head.
That's right.
However, though, Shannon, sometimes when you speak, sometimes when you share your passion, sometimes when you ask questions, there are people at the table who have a problem with you. And then they start stereotyping you. And as you said, when you are not in the room, they may not say anything negative about you, but they build up other folks. And so you get lost in the conversation because they're building up someone else.
Yep. No, absolutely. Have experience there for sure. And I will tell you what has helped me navigate through that. And again, it's been a journey, and I will say that it took me quite a while to get here, but several things. One, finding those safe places. I would sometimes prep before if I knew I had a meeting and I knew I had something to say and something to offer, but I wasn't quite comfortable, I would go to my safe place and say, hey, this issue has come up. I have some thoughts. Can I get your thoughts on how to present this? I would say these people are going to be in the meeting. I don't know them as well as you might know them. Tell me what might resonate with them. And then as I got more comfortable in the organization and started building more relationships on my own, I often would have conversations with folks that I would regularly interact with in meetings. I would try to have interactions with them when we weren't in a meeting, when we weren't in the moment that's tense and we're trying to problem solve, just for them to get to know me as Shannon and me to get to know them as Bob, so that when Bob and Shannon are in a meeting and we may have a difference of opinion, and I may offer up something that they may not necessarily have immediate buy-in on, because we have a relationship outside of that room, I have found that it has been, I've been more effective in getting influence and persuading folks and getting buy-in, but it actually takes work outside of the meeting room. And that's the piece, again, where I had to get comfortable. I had to be comfortable with putting in some additional work to figure out what people care about, what's important to them, so that when I spoke up in the room, they knew that it wasn't just about Shannon, that I really am trying to find some common solutions and win-win solutions for the team. But again, for me, it always goes back to the relationships. I had meetings before the meeting. I may have a meeting after the meeting. And again, not everybody is going to hear what you say and receive it well. That's life. But I think if you have identified people in the organization where you have a safe place, those moments where you think your idea has gone flat, or that people have misread you or misunderstood you or thought you were being, I don't know, too aggressive, because we've heard that term.
Especially for females.
Especially for females, you can have other people who can vouch for you or approach to teamwork, how you collaborate, how you problem solve, what energy you bring to getting things done. That does make the difference. And again, not everybody is going to appreciate what we bring. And that's okay. We just have to know how to navigate when we have some of those not so positive interactions, and having, again, those safe places to help navigate some of those interactions, so that you don't feel like you're on an island alone.
I'm going to interrupt you again.
Yep, please.
So that kind of goes back to your friend who told you that you needed to get out the office. By you getting out of the office, or by other folks getting out there and getting to know people, building relationships with people, because there are people who don't care for me because of my personality, but it's a whole lot more appreciate the value that I bring to the table,
Mhm.
the value that I bring when I speak up for others who won't speak or who are afraid to speak. So it's always good to have people in a room speaking up for you. And not only that, I get people have no idea how many phone calls, how many text messages, emails I receive about people I know or people who have worked for me or with me about them because they are applying for a job or they want to be on a board. People never know because I never go back and say, hey, so and so called me or I gave a reference for you. It is very important, like you said, what people think about you.
Mhm.
Everybody's not going to like you, but the right people need to like you or at least know what you bring to the table.
That's right. Yeah, it's always good to have, those alternative voices that can bring your perspective to the table.
Do you think there are higher expectations for women as they climb the ladder of corporate America or government?
I think there can be. I think it comes in various forms. I think we have a higher expectation of ourselves.
Well,
Whether
but that goes back to when you said earlier, the pressure that you put on yourself.
Mhm. Yes, I think that a lot of it is self um, inflicted, at least in my case. But I will also say that I believe that racism and sexism are still real and still can play out not only in our country, but in our workplace. And if we don't talk about it, and if we don't learn from each other around it, it will perpetuate. And so while I have had a tremendous career at my company, I also know that not everyone may feel the same, and which is why things that like this that you all are doing are fantastic, because we have to continue to have conversations around how do we make sure that we're not leaving folks behind, and how do we make sure everyone feels empowered in owning and navigating their careers and feeling like they have support. And so I do think that even the most well-intended people, we all have blind spots. I have blind spots. I mean, I have spots where that I don't, I have my own biases. We all do. We're human. And so it's really about how do we manage those biases. And when it comes to how women are perceived and what we can do, if we are perceived that there are only certain areas of the business that women tend to be good at. Yeah, I was talking with a colleague recently around, in our industry, where do we have the highest concentration of women? And we tend to not have a high concentration of women in our operations area. Why is that? And it can't just be that women don't want operational roles. So we have to start looking at what are we perpetuating that is allowing that to happen, and how do we unpack that and be more proactive and intentional around making sure that women and other underrepresented communities have exposure to other areas that may not be seen as the right area for them. So that was a long way of answering your question. I hope I answered it.
Well, no, you answered it, but wouldn't that take more rotation of jobs? Because like in government, in the private sector, sometimes they have a little bit different on job descriptions and how people can get jobs. But if you don't have the experience, then the rotation is really important as a person tries to grow in his or her career.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And that's, to me, that's that exposure piece. And we at our company are talking about how do we create more rotational opportunities for employees. And it gets difficult at times because everyone wants to keep their people. Nobody wants to, if you have great people, you get a little selfish and you want to keep your great people to yourself, right? But one of the biggest, I think, testaments to leadership is when you can let one of your great team members go and let them flourish somewhere else.
Well, I like all of mine up in a closet every night.
and throw away that key, right? No, absolutely. And so we're certainly talking about how to do more rotations. And I will tell you, Southern Company was much better about that than we were at AGL Resources. Now that we are part of Southern, folks are doing more rotations and getting experiences in other areas in a way that we weren't always as intentional about as the gas company. But that intentionality is important because, again, that takes time away from what's on our desk to be thoughtful around our talent and what's good for the organization, but also the individual, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of both. Because we have to meet the needs of both. We can't sacrifice one for the other. And how do we balance that?
I do have another question that's a little different from that. So with the pandemic, all the other challenges that we're facing in the workplace in America today, how do you see the treatment of Gen X, millennials, Generation X, the baby boomers? How do you see them being treated the same or them being treated different in the workplace? Or how are you dealing with that generational, all those different generational gaps? Because that's about 4 generations right there.
Yeah, at no time ever have we had this many generations converge in our organization at one time, in our industry at one time. And I believe that, one, we have to listen more and understand more. Sometimes we can just get inundated with all of this information around generational differences and what people care about. I remember reading something that said millennials are all about, electronics, doing everything digitally. They don't care about coming into the office. And then when the pandemic hit and we weren't in the offices, feedback we got was that our younger generation of employees, they actually missed that in-person collaboration time. But we were making assumptions.
The people who just got out of college, because they were locked up during college and stuff, they have made it real clear they want to go to the office.
That's right. Yep. But we were, looking at all of this data and these articles telling us they wanted something different. But once we took a step back and actually listened, we realized that they craved that in-person interaction in a way that some of our more tenured employees hadn't, because they had already experienced it. They'd already, collaborated with colleagues over the many years. And so I do think that, one, we can't always assume we know what each of the generation. I mean, of course, there are, some general themes that may ring true, but I do think we just have to make time to listen for understanding, to really figure out what folks want. And I think as leaders, particularly for our teams that we have the privilege and responsibility of leading, really drilling down with our teams and not expecting the corporation to tell us and give us direction around how to approach the multi-generations. I think we have to really dig deep with our teams and find out, what the dynamics of the team are based on the generational makeup.
Okay, so I do have one comment in the chat and the Q&A that says, thank you for the pie. There are things you spoke that resonated with her. And then someone else also said, 1, team have a safe space, 2, self-awareness, 3, not leaving people behind. And the person was thanking you for that information.
My pleasure. Glad I said something that could resonate with you.
Well, let me ask you this. During your career where you are now, what would you say would be some of your most challenging times and hardest decisions that you've had to make?
For me, the hardest decisions I have to make really are around people. And it's in part because my natural leaning is really around just having a passion for people. And I don't like to disappoint, right? And so when I think about, business decisions that we have to make, I've been trained up for that. I've been trained up on how to problem solve, how to, read financial statements and manage budgets and, work through regulatory issues and develop strategy. But when you're dealing with people, and when you think about how unique every individual is, those are decisions that for me, I think tend to be the hardest. And one is because I have to make sure that, again, I am not letting my bias overtake my decision-making and how I am managing the individuals on my team. Two, managing people takes time. It's so easy to get, again, caught up with deadlines and what's in front of us. But I believe that it is fundamental to my responsibility as a leader to make time for my people, not just in the collective, but individually. And I really took to heart talking about things that resonate. I was in a leadership development program, and one of the professors talked about leadership and what he believes makes a great leader. And he said for him, great leaders wake up every day with the mindset of what can I do today to support and influence someone else's dreams. And when he said that, I just said, like, whoa, because for me, that meant my career really isn't about me anymore. I feel very comfortable and secure in my place and where I am, and I feel very supported. And so now for me, it's about how do I make sure that with the folks that I'm directly responsible for leading, but also across the board in our organization, because I know people see me, and I know people see me in the role that I am in. And I also know that they have not seen me in this role often. And there's a certain responsibility that comes with that as a woman and as a woman of color that I own. And so when I think about the hard decisions, again, it really is around owning that responsibility that I know I have because of the opportunities I've been given, and making sure that I am making decisions that are in the interest of the people I have the privilege of serving. And if I do that, I'm going to do what's good also for the corporation as well.
Thank you for this. We only have like 1 minute left. And Shannon, I would like for you to close with just giving a few tips for people, for women, for others who, how do you move? How do you grow? How do you get there? If you could just give a few tips on that.
Yeah. So I think I will start with, we have to give ourselves grace. Give ourselves grace to experiment, to take risk, to learn, and not think that we have to check every single box in order to go after an opportunity. Because part of growth is learning. And if we're not learning, then we're not growing. And we shouldn't expect to know everything going into the role, because part of the fun in taking on a new role for me is the learning. The other thing I would say is build relationships that are meaningful, find your safe places, find people to learn from, make time to also to find people who can learn from you and to pay your learning forward. And the last thing I would say is make time for self-care. it's so easy to get caught in the grind of what we do. And I love what I do. I absolutely love what I do, and count it a privilege every day I get to work for the company I work for, and work with the people I work with. But I also know that if I'm not careful, I would let it consume me, and I won't take time for me and my family. And so practicing and being intentional about self-care and mental health, we have to be intentional about that as well.
Okay, so Shannon Pierce is the Vice President, Growth and Chief External Affairs Officer at SouthStar Energy Services. Shannon, we greatly appreciate you being with us today. Thank you so much for all that you have shared.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed talking with you, Gail.
All right, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. You too.
All right, we're out.